Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku's quirk let him absorb pain, but transfer it to someone he loves. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world, for a 4-year-old Izuku Midoriya, was painted in primary colors. It was the brilliant red of All Might's cape, the dazzling yellow of his hair, and the unflinching blue of his eyes. The Midoriya apartment was a shrine to this simple, perfect truth. All Might posters papered the walls of Izuku's bedroom, his smiling face a silent promise of safety. All Might action figures were scattered across the living room floor, frozen mid-punch in their eternal battle against imaginary evil. All Might's booming laugh echoed from the computer screen whenever Izuku begged his mother to watch the hero's debut video just one more time. His mother, Inko, was the sun that made these colors shine so brightly. She was warmth and soft hands, the smell of katsudon and clean laundry. She was the gentle voice that narrated his hero games, providing the cries for help from stuffed animals and the grateful thanks of a rescued city. Their love was a closed, perfect circuit, a universe of two where heroism was the ultimate good and kindness was its fuel. Mom, look! Izuku's voice was a high-pitched squeak of excitement. He held up his favorite All Might figure, a limited edition Silver Age model that Inko had spent weeks tracking down for his birthday. He's using the Carolina Smash! The villain is totally defeated! Inko turned from the stove, a fond smile gracing her lips. A stray lock of dark green hair had fallen across her face, and she tucked it behind her ear. Oh my, he's so strong, Aiza! You saved us all again. I know! He chirped, puffing out his small chest. When I get my quirk, I'm gonna be just like him. I'll have a super strong punch and I'll save 100 people. No, 1,000,000 people, and I'll always be smiling, so they know everything is okay. His conviction was absolute, as solid and real as the floor beneath his feet. In a world where 80% of the population was born with a special power, it wasn't a question of if, but when. And for a boy with a heart so full of heroic aspiration, his quirk was destined to be something wonderful. He could feel it, a thrumming anticipation in his bones, a sense of greatness coiled just beneath his skin, waiting for the right moment to burst forth. The apartment was filled with the cozy sounds of a lazy afternoon. The gentle hiss of vegetables in a pan, the bubble and whistle of the electric kettle on the counter coming to a boil for tea, and the constant, happy stream of Izuku's chatter. And you know what the best part will be, Mom? He asked, running up to her and tugging on her apron. What's that, sweetie? She asked, her attention focused on dicing carrots with practiced ease. When I'm a hero, you'll never have to be scared of anything ever again. If a villain comes, I'll punch him. If there's a fire, I'll blow it out. If you're ever sad, I'll make you happy. Tears welled in Inko's eyes, the easy, warm tears of a mother's overwhelming love. She crouched down, her face level with his. Oh, Izuku. You already make me so happy. You're my little hero, quirk or no quirk. She hugged him tightly, and he buried his face in her shoulder, inhaling the familiar, comforting scent of her. For a perfect, crystalline moment, everything was right. The world was safe. Love was simple. Heroes always won. It was a misplaced step that shattered the crystal. As Inko stood up, her foot caught on the leg of the small kitchen stool Izuku had used to get a glass of water earlier. Her balance, for a split second, was gone. She flailed, her hand reaching out for the counter to steady herself. Her fingers, instead of finding the cool laminate, brushed against the side of the fully boiled, whistling kettle. The world dissolved into a cacophony of horror. There was the clatter of the kettle tipping, the splash of scalding water, and a sound Izuku had never heard before. A raw, sharp scream of agony from his mother. It wasn't the playful shriek from a scary movie or a startled gasp. It was pure, undiluted pain, a sound that ripped through the cozy fabric of their afternoon and tore it to shreds. He saw her recoil, clutching her hand to her chest. The skin on the back of her hand was already an angry, blistering red. Tears streamed down her face, her body trembling with shock and pain. Izuku's 4-year-old brain short-circuited. The color drained from his world, replaced by the stark, terrifying white of panic. His hero, his son, his entire universe, was hurt. The All Might figure fell from his grasp, clattering silently to the floor. The promise he had just made echoed in his ears, a cruel and mocking taunt. "You'll never have to be scared. I'll save you." He had to do something. Heroes saved people. Heroes made the pain go away. He scrambled forward, his own tears blurring his vision. "Mom! Mom, are you okay? Stay back, Aizu, it's hot, the water." She gasped, her voice tight with pain, but he didn't listen. He couldn't. His instincts, forged by 1,000 viewings of heroic debuts and selfless rescues, screamed at him to act. He reached out, his small, trembling hands closing around his mother's wrist, just above the burn. He had to help. He had to take the pain away, and then it happened. The moment his skin touched hers, a sensation unlike anything he had ever known coursed through him. It was not a physical feeling, not at first. It was a psychic jolt, like a key turning in a lock deep inside his soul. A cold, silent vacuum opened within him, and with an invisible, irresistible force, it began to pull. He felt the pain. For one single, solitary, eternal microsecond, he felt the burn as if it were his own. A searing, blistering heat that felt like his own skin was melting from his bones. It was a pure, distilled agony that stole his breath and lit up every nerve ending in his body with white-hot fire. A scream was building in his own throat, a mirror of the one that had just torn from his mother's. And then, just as quickly as it came, it was gone. The torrent of pain that had flooded him was siphoned away, leaving an eerie, hollow emptiness in its wake. He looked up at his mother, his eyes wide. Her face, which had been twisted in a mask of agony, had slackened into profound, bewildered relief. The tears were still on her cheeks, but the trembling had subsided. She stared at her hand, then at him. "Izuku," she whispered, her voice full of awe. The pain. It's gone." He did it. A wave of dizzying, triumphant joy washed over him. He did it. He was a hero. This was his quirk. It wasn't a super strong punch, it was something better, something kinder. He could take away the hurt. He could heal. "I did it, Mom!" he cried, his voice thick with relief and pride. "I made it better! My quirk, it came!" He beamed at her, his heart swelling. This was the moment his life truly began. The moment he stepped onto the path that led straight to the smiling, V for victory pose of his idol. But his mother's expression was not one of joy. The awe on her face was curdling into confusion, and then, into a new, rising tide of horror. Her eyes widened, and her breath hitched in her chest. The circuit between them, the perfect, loving connection, was still open. And the pain he had absorbed had to go somewhere. It couldn't just vanish. The quirk was not an eraser. It was a conduit, and having nowhere else to go, the searing, agonizing pain he had taken from her hand, amplified by its brief, violent journey through him, slammed back into its source. Inko screamed again. This scream was 1,000 times worse than the first. It was jagged, broken, filled with the terror of a pain that made no sense. She collapsed to her knees, cradling her hand as if it were on fire all over again. "It's back!" she sobbed, her body racked with fresh tremors. "Oh God, it's worse! It's so much worse!" Izuku's triumphant smile dissolved. The primary colors of his world bled into a muddy, terrifying gray. What had happened? He had fixed it. He had taken the pain. Why was it back? Why was it worse? He looked from his own small, unmarked hands to his mother's red, blistering skin, and then to her face, now a portrait of suffering he had somehow authored. He hadn't saved her. He had hurt her. He had taken her pain, and in some monstrous, magical way, he had given it right back, magnified and multiplied. The smell of burned skin mingled with the scent of his mother's tears. The all-might figure on the floor seemed to mock him, its plastic smile a symbol of a heroism he had just tried to emulate, only to fail in the most catastrophic way imaginable. He began to cry, but these were not the frightened tears of a child seeing his parent hurt. These were the desolate, soul-deep sobs of someone who had discovered a terrible, ugly truth about himself. His quirk wasn't a gift. It wasn't a hero's power. It was a curse. Weeks passed, turning into a month, then 2. The burn on Inko's hand healed, fading from a raw wound to a pinkish scar, a permanent reminder of that awful afternoon. They never spoke of it. The event was buried under a thick blanket of unspoken fear and confusion. For Inko, it was a traumatic, inexplicable incident, the pain vanishing and then returning with vengeful fury. Perhaps it was just shock, a trick of the mind. For Izuku, it was a secret he guarded with the fierce, desperate shame of a 4-year-old who believes he has something fundamentally wrong with him. He went to the Quirk doctor with his mother, a silent, hollowed-out version of the excited boy he had been. He sat quietly as the doctor explained about the extra joint in his pinky toe, a signifier of quirklessness. He watched his mother's face fall, saw the single tear she tried to hide. He heard her whisper, "I'm sorry, Izuku. I'm so sorry." He should have been devastated. Every fiber of his being had been geared towards getting a quirk and becoming a hero. But as he sat there, a wave of something dark and cold washed over him. Relief. It was better this way. If he was quirkless, he couldn't hurt her again. If he had no power, he could cause no pain. He accepted the diagnosis as a penance. He would let the world think he was broken, powerless, a rare genetic throwback. It was a lie, but it was a safe lie. It was a shield to protect the only person he truly loved from the monster lurking inside him. Life found a new, muted normal. Izuku still watched videos of All Might, but now there was a pane of glass between him and the screen, an unbridgeable distance. He still played with his action figures, but their heroic poses felt less like a promise and more like a sad story from a world he could never belong to. His relationship with Katsuki Bakugo, once a simple dynamic of leader and adoring follower, began to sour. "You're quirkless?" Bakugo had sneered the day after the doctor's visit, his palms already popping with tiny, arrogant explosions. "You're even more useless than I thought. You can't be a hero without a quirk, Deku. You're just a pebble on the side of the road, Deku." Useless. The name stuck. And Izuku, in his heart of hearts, agreed with it. What good was a power that only brought suffering? It was the most useless quirk of all. They were at their usual park, a dusty patch of land with a swing set, a slide, and enough open space for a pack of rowdy, quirk-wielding children to run wild. A girl with extendable fingers was playing cat's cradle with herself. A boy was hardening his skin to deflect pebbles Bakugo was flicking at him. And Bakugo, as always, was the center of it all, a miniature god of smoke and noise. Izuku sat by the sandbox, meticulously building a fortress, a quiet, solitary activity. He was watching Bakugo, as he always did, with a painful mix of his old admiration and a new, weary apprehension. Bakugo was trying to show off, leaping from the top of the jungle gym with a loud "die!" and a blast from his palms to cushion his landing. It was a move he'd done a dozen times. But this time, his footing was off. He landed awkwardly, his ankle twisting, and he tumbled forward, his momentum carrying him onto the coarse gravel path that ringed the playground. There was a sickening, scraping sound. Bakugo, who never cried, let out a sharp, angry yelp of pain. He pushed himself up, his face red with humiliation and fury. His knee was a mess of raw, scraped skin, dotted with embedded bits of gravel and welling up with blood. The other children fell silent. A few of them giggled nervously. Seeing the invincible Bakugo hurt was a rare and shocking sight. Bakugo's eyes blazed. "What are you looking at, extras?" But Izuku wasn't looking at his face. He was looking at the wound. He saw the blood. He saw the grimace of pain Bakugo was trying so hard to hide. And that old, stupid, heroic instinct, the one he had tried so hard to bury, stirred within him. Someone is hurt. I have to help. The memory of his mother's scream was a cold wall of ice in his mind, but the sight of his friend's blood was a fire that threatened to melt it. Just a little bit, a treacherous voice whispered in his head. Maybe it won't be so bad this time. It's just a scrape. Get away from me, Deku! Bakugo snarled as Izuku scrambled towards him, his eyes wide with concern. Izuku didn't listen. He was 4 years old, and his heart was still bigger than his fear. He reached out, his hand hovering over the bloody knee. He could feel Bakugo's radiating anger, but beneath it, he could also feel the throbbing, stinging pain. He had to make it better. He pressed his hand gently against the uninjured skin just beside the scrape. The jolt came again. That psychic key turning in its lock. This time, he was ready for it. He felt the pain flood into him, a sharp, stinging, gritty agony, as if a wire brush was being scraped across his own kneecap. He flinched, a gasp escaping his lips, and then he felt the other part of it, the part he hadn't understood before. He felt the pain leave him, pulled away through an invisible channel, a psychic cord that stretched out from his core and connected to, somewhere. He felt a distinct, sickening click as the connection was made and the transfer was completed. It was like a phone call connecting to a distant receiver. He pulled his hand back as if he'd been burned. Bakugo stared down at his knee, his jaw slack with disbelief. The throbbing had vanished. The sharp sting was gone. It was still bloody and raw, but the pain itself had been completely erased. What did you do?" Bakugo demanded, his anger replaced by a flicker of fearful confusion. He looked at Izuku not as a useless pebble, but as something strange and unsettling. He shoved him hard. "Get away from me, you freak!" Bakugo scrambled to his feet and ran off, followed by his other friends, leaving Izuku sitting alone on the gravel path. Izuku didn't move. He stared at his hands, a cold dread seeping into his bones, far colder than the winter evening air that was beginning to settle. That click. That psychic cord. It hadn't connected to Bakugo. It had stretched out, far beyond the park, seeking its anchor. The anchor forged by the most powerful, unconditional love he knew. The realization hit him like a physical blow. "Mom!" He shot to his feet, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He didn't say goodbye to anyone. He didn't grab his backpack. He just ran. He ran out of the park and onto the familiar streets leading home, his small legs pumping as fast as they could. Every step was a prayer. "Please no. Please let me be wrong. Please, please, please." The familiar dread from that day in the kitchen returned, 10 times stronger. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, the setting sun casting long, monstrous shadows that chased him down the pavement. He fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking so badly it took him 3 tries to get the door open. "Mom?" he called out, his voice a panicked, breathless squeak. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. The television was off. There was no sound of cooking, no humming, nothing. Just a heavy, oppressive silence. "Mom, I'm home!" he called again, louder this time. A sound answered him. A small, muffled sob from the direction of the living room. His blood ran cold. He crept forward, his sneakers silent on the wooden floor. He peeked around the doorframe, and his world ended for the second time. She was on the floor, curled up on the rug beside the sofa. She wasn't wailing like she had in the kitchen. This was a quiet, weary weeping, the kind that comes after the peak of pain has passed, leaving only exhaustion and misery in its wake. She was clutching her left knee. The same knee Bakugo had scraped. She looked up as he entered, her eyes red-rimmed and confused. She forced a wobbly smile, trying to be strong for her son. "Izuku, honey, you're home." He couldn't speak. He could only stare at her hand, protectively wrapped around her knee. "Mom!" he finally whispered, his voice trembling. What happened? Did you fall?" She shook her head, her expression clouded with a frightening bewilderment. "No, sweetie. It was the strangest thing. I was just sitting here, reading, and then this pain, it appeared. Out of nowhere. A horrible, sharp, scraping pain. Right here." She tapped the exact spot on her kneecap where Bakugo's injury had been. "It felt like I'd fallen on gravel. But it's already starting to fade a little. It was just so sudden." The pieces, which had been floating in the terrified ether of his mind, slammed together with the force of a tectonic collision. The kettle. Her hand. He'd touched her. The pain had rebounded, returning to her because she was the only one connected to him. The park. Bakugo's knee. He'd touched him. The pain had traveled through the invisible cord of love that bound him to his mother and manifested in her body. It wasn't a rebound. It was a transfer. He didn't just feel their pain. He took it. And he gave it to his mother. He was not a conduit for healing. He was a delivery system for agony. His quirk didn't make the hurt go away. It just changed the victim. And its target was always, the person he loved most in the entire world. A wave of nausea so profound it almost buckled his knees washed over him. He thought back to every time he'd seen someone trip, every scraped elbow or bumped head he had ever witnessed. Every time, his first instinct had been to reach out, to help. What if he had? How many phantom aches and pains had his mother suffered, dismissing them as random twinges, never knowing her son was the one inflicting them upon her? The full, monstrous weight of it settled on his 4-year-old shoulders. To be a hero, to save someone, he would have to consciously, deliberately choose to hurt his mom, to take the pain from a stranger and force it upon her. It was a devil's bargain. A hero's sacrifice, but the sacrifice wasn't his own. It was hers. And she would never even know why. He backed away slowly, out of the living room, his eyes wide with a horror that was ancient and absolute. He stumbled to his own bedroom, the one with the posters of the smiling hero, and quietly shut the door. The click of the latch sounded like a cell door locking. He slid down to the floor, his back against the door, and hugged his knees to his chest. He didn't cry. The horror was too deep for tears. It was a cold, hard knot of certainty in the pit of his stomach. His idol on the wall smiled down at him, a symbol of everything he could now never be. Heroes save people. They don't torture their mothers. Heroes have quirks that bring hope, not ones that function on a foundation of transferred suffering. His power was a villain's quirk. It was evil, right there, in the silent dark of his bedroom, surrounded by the ghosts of his shattered dreams. 4-year-old Izuku Midoriya made a vow. It was a solemn, absolute promise, forged in the fires of guilt and terror. Never again. He would never, ever use his quirk again. He would bury it so deep inside himself that no one would ever know it existed. He would be Deku. He would be useless. He would be quirkless. He would endure any taunt, any pitying look, any loneliness, because it was infinitely better than being the monster who made his mother scream. His eyes fell upon a stack of fresh, empty notebooks on his desk. His mother had bought them for him, for when he started practicing his writing. He crawled over to the desk, his movements stiff and robotic. He pulled one from the stack. The cover was blank, a field of possibility. He couldn't be a hero. He couldn't use his fists or his power to save anyone. But he could still watch. He could still learn. He could analyze. He could fill his head with the knowledge of heroes, even if he could never join their ranks. It was the only way he could touch his dream without hurting anyone. It was his penance. His cage. He opened the notebook to the first page. With a slightly shaky hand, he picked up a pencil and wrote the first words of the rest of his life. Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 1. Outside his room, he could hear his mother moving about, the sounds of her making dinner. She was humming softly, the phantom pain in her knee having faded completely, already a strange memory. She was safe, and Izuku would spend the rest of his life making sure she stayed that way. The cost was his dream. The price was his soul. And it was a price he would pay without a moment's hesitation. The first time he used his quirk was a mistake. The second time was a horrifying lesson. There would not be a third. This was the first and, he swore, the very last time. 10 years is a long time to hold your breath. For Izuku Midoriya, that was what his life had become. A decade-long, silent, desperate effort to keep a monster in a cage. The cage was his own body, and the monster wore his face. His childhood vow, made in the shadow of his All Might posters, had calcified into the central pillar of his existence. Never again. The world moved on, blossoming with the vibrant chaos of quirks. His classmates sprouted wings, learned to talk to squirrels, or shot lasers from their fingertips. They treated their powers with the casual entitlement of those born to privilege, complaining about control issues or the inconvenience of their mutations. Izuku watched them from a self-imposed distance, a ghost in the hallways of Aldera Junior High. He was not just an outcast, he was an anomaly. A quirkless boy in a superpowered age. To his peers, this made him a target for pity at best, and contempt at worst. To his teachers, he was a liability, a fragile thing to be handled with weary sighs and disclaimers. To Katsuki Bakugo, he was simply Deku. Useless. The name, once a playground taunt, had become a shield. Every time Bakugo snarled it at him, every time his lackeys sneered it in the halls, Izuku absorbed it. He let it settle over him like a cloak, because useless was safe. A useless person couldn't save anyone, which meant a useless person couldn't hurt anyone either. Every insult was a reinforcement of his vow, a painful affirmation that he was doing the right thing. His heroism, denied any physical outlet, had turned inward and become obsessive. It poured onto the pages of his notebooks. Hero Analysis for the Future. Volume 13 was nearly full. Each page was a frantic, meticulous tapestry of data, heroes' strengths, weaknesses, support gear, fighting styles, ultimate moves. He charted quirk compatibilities, theorized team-ups, and designed equipment upgrades. It was more than a hobby. It was a sublimation. When he saw someone stumble in the street, his body would lurch forward an inch, his hand twitching, before he brutally clamped down on the instinct. The urge to reach out, to touch, to absorb the fleeting pain of a stubbed toe or a twisted ankle, was a constant, low-grade hum beneath his skin. Instead of acting, he would go home and write. He would analyze the hero Kamui Woods' binding techniques, losing himself in the theoretical application of power as a way to forget the terrible reality of his own. He became a master of avoidance. He never took part in trust falls during gym class. He flinched away from friendly pats on the shoulder. He kept a careful, calculated distance from everyone, his personal space an unbreachable fortress. Friendships required intimacy, and intimacy was a danger he could not afford. Love was the fuel for his curse. He had his mother, his one precious anchor. He could not, would not, risk creating another. Inko worried, of course. She saw her son's hunched shoulders, his averted eyes, his fanatical devotion to a dream the world had told him was impossible. She saw the fresh scorch marks that sometimes appeared on his uniform, testament to another lesson from Bakugo. She saw the loneliness that clung to him like a second skin. She blamed the quirk diagnosis, the cruelty of other children, the unfairness of their society. She never suspected the truth, that her son's isolation was a carefully constructed sacrifice, made for her. Every night, when he saw her humming in the kitchen, her hands unmarked by phantom pains, her body free of transferred agonies, he knew the sacrifice was worth it. His dream for her safety. It was the most heroic thing he could do. This fragile, painful equilibrium was shattered on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday afternoon. The day had been typical. The teacher had callously announced their high school ambitions, and Bakugo, naturally, had declared his intent to go to UA High, the top hero school in the country. He then turned his explosive scorn on Izuku, who had also, foolishly, listed UA as his choice. "You're worse than these rejects, you quirkless wannabe!" Bakugo had roared, slamming a smoking palm onto Izuku's desk. "You really think they'd let someone like you in when they could have me?" Izuku had simply endured it, his head bowed. After class, Bakugo had cornered him, snatched his notebook, volume 13, scorched it between his palms, and tossed it out the window into the koi pond below. "If you want to be a hero so bad, pray you'll be born with a quirk in your next life, and take a swan dive off the roof." The words had stung, but Izuku's first, panicked thought wasn't about the insult. It was the image of a fall. The sickening crunch of bone, the blinding flash of pain. A pain he could, theoretically, erase. A pain he would then have to send rocketing down that psychic cord into his mother. He shuddered, the thought making him physically ill. He was just glad Bakugo hadn't touched him. He'd retrieved his soggy, charred notebook, his heart aching for the lost work, the lost outlet. Walking home, he took the long way, passing under a gloomy overpass. He was replaying Bakugo's words, a familiar litany of his own perceived worthlessness, when a shadow detached itself from the deeper gloom of the tunnel. "A medium-sized invisibility cloak!" A gurgling, wet voice rasped. Before Izuku could even process the words, a tsunami of foul-smelling, semi-liquid sludge surged towards him. It enveloped him, pouring into his mouth and nose, a living, breathing tide of filth and malice. Panic, stark and absolute, seized him. He couldn't breathe. His limbs were pinned, his struggles only serving to embed him deeper within the villain's suffocating embrace. "I'm dying," he thought, his vision starting to tunnel. "Is this it? Is this how it ends?" And then, a sound that cut through his terror like a thunderclap. "Have no fear! For I am here!" The manhole cover shot into the air. All Might, in all his sun-drenched, primary-colored glory, stood there, his impossible smile a beacon in the darkness. Texas smash! A hurricane of wind pressure tore the sludge villain apart, scattering him into harmless droplets. Izuku collapsed to the ground, gasping, his lungs burning as they greedily sucked in clean, precious air. The last thing he saw before blacking out was his idol, the hero who had been a distant god on a screen, now standing over him, a tangible reality. When he came to, he was being gently patted on the cheek by the skeletal, deflated form of Toshinori Yagi. The ensuing conversation was a series of devastating blows that chipped away at the last vestiges of his childhood fantasy. All Might's injury, the 5-year-old wound that had crippled him, the time limit on his power. And finally, the verdict, delivered with a heavy, regretful heart. Without a quirk, you can't be a hero. It was the confirmation of everything he had told himself for a decade. The final nail in the coffin of his dream. But as he stood on that rooftop, watching his idol leave, the words didn't just bring despair. They brought a strange, bitter peace. The universe was agreeing with him. His choice was the right one. A hero was something he was not, could not, and should not be. He trudged home, a hollow shell. But then he heard the explosions. He saw the smoke. He ran towards the chaos, because that's what he was programmed to do, even if he could do nothing once he got there. And he saw it. The same sludge villain, reformed, angrier than before. And trapped within its swirling, disgusting mass was a single, struggling figure. Spiky blonde hair, red, furious eyes, now wide with a terror he was trying desperately to conceal. Kaken. The pros were there, Death Arms, Kamui Woods, Backdraft, but they were helpless. The villain's body was fluid, Bakugo's explosions were causing more harm than good, and none of them had the right quirk to handle the situation. They were waiting for someone with a more suitable power, waiting, while Bakugo was suffocating. Izuku stood frozen in the crowd, his salvaged notebook clutched to his chest. He saw it all with the terrifying clarity of his analyst's mind. Death Arms needed a solid surface to punch. Kamui Woods was useless against a liquid opponent, and weak to fire. Backdraft could only contain the fires, not rescue the victim. They were all doing their jobs, but their jobs weren't enough, and Izuku knew, with a certainty that made his blood run cold, that there was one person there who could end Bakugo's suffering in an instant. Him. He watched Bakugo struggle, and the world seemed to slow down. He could almost feel the thick sludge clogging his own throat, the burning in his own lungs. He saw Bakugo's eyes meet his for a fraction of a second. And in them, he didn't see the bully, the tormentor, the arrogant rival. He saw a scared kid who was going to die. A kid who needed help. A hero would save him. The thought was an electric shock. It bypassed 10 years of logic, fear, and self-denial. It bypassed the voice of All Might on the rooftop. It was the purest, most fundamental truth of his soul. His legs moved. He wasn't thinking. He was a projectile of pure instinct, launched from the crowd before anyone could react. He dodged past the police line, his worn red sneakers pounding against the pavement. The pros shouted at him, their voices distant and meaningless. "Kid, no! Get back here! It's suicide!" He didn't have a plan. He was running on a single, desperate impulse. He unslung his backpack and hurled it at the villain's face. It struck one of its massive eyes, causing it to roar in surprise and momentarily loosen its grip. For a precious second, Bakugo's mouth and nose were clear. He took a ragged, desperate gasp of air. It was enough. Izuku was there, right in front of him, close enough to see the tears of frustration and terror welling in Bakugo's eyes. He reached out, his hand clawing through the viscous slime, aiming for Bakugo's trapped arm. "I have to save him!" The moment his fingers brushed against Bakugo's skin, the world dissolved. The jolt. The psychic lock turning. The vacuum inside him opened, a ravenous, yawning void. And the pain, oh God, the pain, came flooding in. It was 1,000 times worse than a scraped knee. It was the agony of suffocation, a primal, brain-screaming terror. It was the crushing pressure of the sludge, the feeling of his own explosions detonating against his skin, a simultaneous burning and concussive force. It was the metallic taste of fear and the searing pain of oxygen deprivation in every cell of his body. It was Bakugo's entire ordeal, concentrated into a single, unbearable instant. He felt the agony course through him, a river of pure suffering. And then he felt the other thing. The click. The connection. The psychic cord, dormant for a decade, snapped taut, stretching out from his soul. He didn't have to guess its destination. He felt it. He could almost see it. He saw his own apartment, the warm lights on. He saw his mother Inko, probably setting the table for dinner, humming a cheerful tune, completely unaware of the tidal wave of unimaginable torment he was about to unleash upon her. The feeling of being suffocated, burned, and crushed, all at once, delivered directly into her nervous system by the son who swore to protect her. Her cheerful hum would turn into a scream. Her body would collapse. She would feel the phantom fires, the phantom pressure, the phantom drowning. She would be plunged into a hell of his making, never again. The vow he'd made as a child screamed in his mind, louder than the explosions, louder than the villain's roar, louder than the terror flooding his senses. He had a choice. A stark, simple, monstrous choice laid bare in the space of a single heartbeat. Let Bakugo suffer, possibly die. Or inflict that suffering upon his mother. His hand, which had been reaching to take hold of Bakugo, to complete the transfer, recoiled as if it had been plunged into lava. He didn't just pull it back. He ripped it away, a violent, desperate act of will that felt like tearing a part of his own soul. He severed the connection. The pain he had absorbed, with nowhere to go, slammed back into its original host. Bakugo choked, his eyes widening as the full force of his agony returned. Izuku had made his choice. He chose to protect his mother. He chose to let Bakugo suffer. In that single, horrific moment, as he stood there, his hand hovering uselessly in the air, he had failed as a hero in every conceivable way. He hadn't saved anyone. He had just momentarily tasted their pain before shoving it back at them. He was, truly and utterly, Deku. It was then that All Might, pushed beyond his limits by the sight of the boy's reckless courage, reappeared. Detroit Smash! He roared, and the weather itself changed. Rain began to fall, extinguishing the fires and washing away the last remnants of the villain. The aftermath was a blur. The pros praised All Might and scolded Izuku. They lauded Bakugo for his powerful quirk and his resilience. Izuku was dismissed, an irrelevant, reckless footnote in the day's events. He trudged away, unnoticed, the weight of his secret, his failure, and his choice pressing down on him, heavier than any villain. He was almost home when a familiar voice called out to him. "I am here!" All Might, in his true, skeletal form, skidded to a stop in front of him. Izuku flinched, expecting another lecture. "I came to thank you," All Might said, his voice quiet but intense. "And to apologize. And to address what I said earlier." Izuku could only stare, confused. "I told you that you couldn't be a hero," All Might continued, his sunken eyes fixed on Izuku's. "But what I saw back there, you were more heroic than anyone. You moved without thinking. You acted while the pros, myself included, stood by and hesitated." Izuku's heart clenched. All Might was praising him for the very act that had led to his most profound failure. The praise felt like acid. "But that's not all I saw," All Might said, his gaze sharpening. He took a step closer. "I was in the crowd. I watched you. You ran in, a quirkless boy's bravery. You threw your bag, a brilliant, selfless distraction. And then, you reached for him." Izuku froze. "You got close enough to touch him," All Might said, his voice low and searching. "And for a second I saw it. Something changed in your eyes. It wasn't just fear. It was resolve. A plan. You were going to do something. And then, you flinched." The word hung in the air between them, heavy and accusatory. "It wasn't a flinch of fear," All Might clarified, his voice laced with a deep, unsettling curiosity. "I've seen that 1,000 times. This was different. You pulled your hand back like it was on fire. You made a conscious choice to stop what you were doing. You looked like a man who had just looked into the abyss and chosen to step back. Tell me, young Midoriya, what happened in that moment? What did you see?" The questions were too perceptive. All Might hadn't just seen a reckless kid. He had seen the choice. He had seen the hesitation that was born not of cowardice, but of some terrible, hidden conflict. And Izuku broke. The dam that had held for 10 years, cracked by the day's events, shattered completely. A decade of suffocating silence, of crushing guilt, of profound loneliness, came pouring out in a raw, hysterical torrent of sobs. He collapsed to his knees, his hands covering his face as if to hide his own monstrousness. I couldn't. He choked out, the words torn from him. I couldn't do it. Couldn't do what, my boy? All Might asked gently, kneeling in front of him, his usual bravado replaced by a deep, paternal concern. I'm not quirkless! Izuku wailed, the secret tumbling out, ugly and misshapen. I have one. I've always had one. But it's not a hero's power. It's evil. It's a villain's quirk. He looked up, his face a mess of tears and snot and utter despair, and met his idol's shocked gaze. My quirk, it lets me take away someone's pain. He sobbed, the words clawing at his throat. When I touched Kaken, I felt it. The suffocation, the burning. I took it from him. But I can't make it disappear. I have to send it to someone else. Someone I love. He took a ragged breath, the final, most damning piece of the confession falling from his lips. To use my quirk to save someone, I have to hurt my mom. I felt the connection open. I was about to send all of Kaken's agony to her. And I couldn't. I chose to let him suffer instead. He looked down at his own trembling hands, seeing them not as tools of a potential hero, but as instruments of torture. What kind of hero does that? He whispered, his voice cracking with self-loathing. What kind of hero has to choose who suffers? It's not a hero's quirk, All Might. It's a curse, he finished spent, leaving his confession hanging in the quiet evening air. The only sounds were his own ragged breaths and the distant city traffic. He had finally told his secret, laid his ugly, broken soul bare at the feet of the symbol of peace. He waited for the judgment, for the horror, for the confirmation that he was, and always would be, a monster. The silence that followed Izuku's confession was a living entity. It pressed in on them from all sides, thick and heavy with the weight of a decade of secrets. The distant hum of the city seemed to fade into nothingness, leaving only the sound of Izuku's ragged, hitching breaths and the quiet rustle of All Might's oversized clothes in the gentle evening breeze. Izuku kept his head bowed, his eyes screwed shut, bracing for the inevitable. He expected a gasp of horror. He expected a step back, a gesture of revulsion. He expected the symbol of peace to look upon him and see the villain he saw in himself. He was prepared for his idol to confirm his deepest fear, that he was fundamentally, irrevocably broken. Instead, what he heard was a long, slow exhale. It wasn't a gasp of shock, but a sigh of profound, weary understanding. When All Might finally spoke, his voice was softer and rougher than Izuku had ever heard it. A villain's quirk, you say? Izuku flinched, nodding numbly, not daring to look up. My boy, Toshinori Yagi said, his voice raw. Look at me. Hesitantly, painfully, Izuku lifted his head. He saw his hero, no longer a towering symbol, but a skeletal man kneeling on the pavement in front of him. The setting sun cast long shadows across his gaunt face, highlighting the sharp angles of his cheekbones and the cavernous hollows of his eyes. But what Izuku saw in those eyes was not disgust. It was a shocking, gut-wrenching empathy. A look of recognition, as if he were staring into a cracked mirror. You believe your power is a curse, Toshinori said, his voice gaining a strange intensity. You think it's a villain's tool because it causes suffering. You've spent 10 years of your life hiding it, denying yourself your dream, all to protect one person from pain. He paused, a humorless, brittle smile touching his lips. You have no idea what a true curse feels like. Before Izuku could process the words, Toshinori lifted a hand and pulled up the side of his loose white t-shirt. Izuku's breath caught in his throat. He had seen the injury before on the rooftop, but only for a moment. Now, in the fading light, it was impossible to look away. It was a wound that defied anatomy, a crater of scarred tissue that seemed to have been carved out of his left side. The skin was a chaotic vortex of purplish, mangled flesh, puckered and twisted around a central, horrifying cavity. It was not a scar from a clean cut, but the remnant of an explosion, a brutal act of violence that had stolen half of the man's torso. It was a permanent testament to unimaginable pain. 5 years ago, Toshinori said, his voice a low growl, a villain did this to me. He took my stomach. I lost one of my lungs. The surgeries saved my life, but they couldn't save me from the consequences. He let the shirt fall, but the image was seared into Izuku's mind. Every single day since, Toshinori continued, his gaze unwavering, I live with this. It's a constant, grinding pain. Sometimes it's a dull ache, a reminder of what I've lost. Other times, it's a sharp, stabbing agony that feels like the villain is carving me up all over again. When I'm in my hero form, the adrenaline helps, but the moment I deflate, he grimaced, a flicker of that very pain crossing his face. The bill always comes due. I smile for the cameras, I tell the world that everything is fine, but underneath it all, there is a foundation of unending pain. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. This, young Midoriya? This is a burden, a weight I have to carry, alone, every single day, to maintain the illusion of the invincible symbol of peace. I smiled to hide the grimace. I laughed to keep from screaming. Izuku stared, his own confession, his own secret agony, suddenly feeling small and insignificant in the face of this colossal, hidden suffering. All Might, the pillar of the world, was a man held together by sheer willpower and drowning in a sea of pain. Your Quirk, Toshinori said, his eyes boring into Izuku's. You take the pain of others. That is, in its essence, the purest form of empathy made manifest. It is the core of what being a hero is, and its price. Its price is that you cannot simply destroy the pain. You must give it to another. A burden must be shouldered. He shook his head, a look of dawning, almost manic revelation on his face. You don't have a villain's quirk, my boy. Good heavens, you have the most heroic quirk I have ever encountered. It's a power of ultimate sacrifice. The sacrifice just isn't yours alone, but my mom. Izuku stammered, the old guilt surging back. I can't. I won't hurt her. I'd rather die. And that is why you are worthy, Toshinori said, his voice ringing with a conviction that sent a shiver down Izuku's spine. That is why this can work. You see your quirk as a problem of who to hurt, but you're looking at it the wrong way. The question isn't who you must hurt. The question is, who is strong enough to help you carry the load? A wild, impossible idea began to form in Izuku's mind, so audacious he barely dared to entertain it. As if reading his thoughts, Toshinori offered his life-altering proposal. Young Midoriya, he said, his voice trembling with the weight of his own words. Your quirk requires an anchor. A person you are bonded to, a person you love, who can receive the pain you absorb. Your mother was your first and only anchor, born of a child's pure love. But bonds can be forged in other ways, through respect, through shared ideals, through the desperate hope one hero places in another. He met Izuku's wide, tear-filled eyes. Let me be your anchor. The world stopped. Izuku's brain felt like it had short-circuited. He stared at his idol, at the skeletal man offering to take on a universe of pain, and he couldn't comprehend it. What? Was all he could manage to whisper. You heard me, Toshinori said, his expression one of grim determination. I am already a broken man. I live in a world of pain already. What's a little more? You go out there. You do the saving. You touch the wounded, you absorb their broken bones, their burns, their fear. And you send it all to me. I will be your lightning rod. Your secret partner. Your pain eater. No, Izuku said immediately, recoiling. The thought was monstrous. No, I can't. I can't deliberately hurt you. You're All Might. I would be torturing my own hero. And what am I now? Toshinori retorted, a flash of frustration in his eyes. A man on a time limit, hiding in the shadows, waiting for my embers to die out. You saw those pros today. They are good people, but they are not enough. The world needs a symbol. But I am failing. I am fading. This is a way for me to still be a part of the fight, even when my body gives out. My pain will have a purpose again. It won't just be the ghost of a past battle. It will be the price of a present rescue. Your rescue. He saw the horrified conflict on Izuku's face and pressed his advantage, his voice softening again. Think of it, my boy. A hero who can instantly end the suffering of any victim. No more waiting for paramedics. No more people dying of shock on their way to the hospital. You could absorb the pain of a fatal internal injury, keeping a person stable long enough for surgeons to save them. You could take the terror from a child trapped in a fire, allowing them to be rescued without a lifetime of trauma. Your potential, it's limitless. The only thing holding you back is the cost. I am telling you, I am willing to pay it. The image was dizzying. Izuku saw it all in a flash. A car crash victim, their agony vanishing with his touch. A firefighter, the searing heat of their burns cooled in an instant. The possibilities were endless, beautiful, truly heroic. And all of it powered by the suffering of the man he admired most in the world. It's too much, Izuku choked out, shaking his head. The pain of 100 people, it would destroy you. Let me worry about that, Toshinori said firmly. My will is stronger than my body. It has to be. This is my choice, young Midoriya. I am offering you a partnership. A different kind of one for all. You will be the one for the people, and I will take the pain for the one. We share the weight. Together. The word together resonated deep in Izuku's soul. For 10 years, he had been utterly, crushingly alone with his secret. The idea of sharing this burden, of not being the sole guardian of his monstrous power, was a temptation so powerful it was almost physically painful. He looked at Toshinori, at the desperate hope in his hero's eyes. It wasn't just an offer to help, it was a plea. All Might needed this as much as he did. He needed a way to matter beyond his time limit. He needed a successor, not just to his power, but to his purpose. Izuku's resolve, so ironclad for a decade, began to crumble. Could he do it? Could he knowingly, willingly, inflict pain on another human being, even if they were volunteering? It went against every fiber of his being. And yet, the alternative was to let his quirk lie dormant forever. To stand by and watch people suffer when he had the power to stop it. To live as Deku, the useless boy, for the rest of his life. Toshinori saw the wavering. He knew he needed to seal the deal, to turn this abstract, terrifying concept into a concrete reality. I am going to train you, he declared, his voice taking on the commanding tone of All Might once more. For the next 10 months, until the UA entrance exam, you will clean this entire beach, he said, gesturing to the nearby Dagoba Municipal Beach Park, which had become an illegal dumping ground, piled high with mountains of trash. You will build your body from the ground up. You need a strong vessel to handle the psychic backlash of your quirk, and to be a hero even without it. He looked at Izuku, his expression softening again. And during this training you will overexert yourself. You will pull muscles. You will be sore. You will be in pain. And that will be our first test. We will practice. Practice. The words sounded so mundane for something so monstrous. Practice hurting his hero. My love for my mother created the bond, Izuku said, his voice barely a whisper, grappling with the mechanics of it. How would it even work with you? My boy, Toshinori said, placing a skeletal hand on Izuku's shoulder. The touch was surprisingly warm. The love of a child for their mother is one of the strongest forces on earth. But the bond between a mentor and their chosen successor, the faith a dying hero places in the next generation, that is a kind of love, too. A powerful one. My admiration for your heroic spirit, for your selfless heart. I suspect it has already forged the link. We just need to test it. And so, the strangest, most painful training regimen in hero history began. The next 10 months were a blur of hauling, lifting, and screaming exertion. Izuku dragged refrigerators across the sand, carried stacks of tires on his back, and pulled rusted cars with thick ropes. Toshinori was a relentless, if unorthodox, coach, cheering him on from atop a pile of discarded electronics, his booming Plus Ultra echoing across the trash-strewn beach. Izuku's body screamed in protest. His muscles, unused to such strain, burned and tore. His hands blistered and bled. His nights were filled with the dull, throbbing ache of a body being systematically broken down and rebuilt. About a month in, the inevitable happened. Izuku was trying to move a massive, waterlogged wardrobe. He put his back into it, gave a mighty heave, and felt a sharp, tearing sensation in his right bicep. He cried out, dropping the wardrobe and clutching his arm. The pain was excruciating, a hot, searing line of fire. Tashinori was by his side in an instant. A torn muscle, he diagnosed, his face grim. A bad one. Izuku cradled his arm, tears of pain and frustration in his eyes. I can't keep training like this. You don't have to, Tashinori said quietly, his eyes intense. It's time. Practice, remember? The air grew thick with tension. The sound of the waves lapping against the shore seemed to recede. Izuku stared at his own arm, at the source of the pain. Then he looked at Tashinori, who stood waiting, his expression a mixture of apprehension and unwavering resolve. Take the pain, Tashinori commanded, his voice soft but firm. Feel it. Absorb it. And then, give it to me. Izuku's hand trembled as he moved it towards his injured arm. His heart hammered in his chest. This was it. The point of no return. The moment he crossed the line he had drawn for himself 10 years ago. He was about to willingly use his quirk to hurt someone. I don't know if I can, he whispered, his voice cracking. You can, Tashinori insisted. Trust me. Trust yourself. Trust the bond between us. Do it, young Midoriya. Be the hero you were born to be. Taking a shaky breath, Izuku pressed the fingers of his left hand against his right bicep. The jolt. The key in the lock. The vacuum inside him opened. The searing, tearing pain from his muscle was sucked into the void, a flash of pure agony that made him gasp. For a split second, he held it within him, a burning coal of suffering. He felt the psychic cord snap taut, seeking its target. This time, he didn't fight it. He didn't pull back. With a silent, tear-filled prayer, he focused his will, his intent, on the skeletal man standing before him. To all might, he felt the click of connection. The pain left him, surging down the invisible conduit. He opened his eyes. The throbbing in his arm was gone. Completely. He could still feel the weakness, the physical reality of the tear, but the sensation of pain had vanished. He looked up at Tashinori. All Might flinched. His whole body went rigid. A sharp gasp escaped his lips, and he clutched his own right arm, in the exact same spot as Izuku's injury. He stumbled back a step, his face pale and beaded with sweat. His breath hitched, and he let out a low groan, his knuckles turning white as he gripped his arm. Izuku watched, horrified and fascinated. He had done it. He had transferred his pain. He had hurt his hero. A wave of guilt so powerful it was nauseating washed over him. I'm sorry, he whispered, tears streaming down his face. I'm so sorry, All Might. Tashinori grit his teeth, his body trembling for a few long seconds. The phantom pain was clearly intense. But then, slowly, deliberately, he straightened up. He took a deep, shuddering breath. He forced his hand to release his arm. A small trickle of blood dripped from the corner of his mouth where he'd bitten his lip. And then, he looked at Izuku. Through the haze of second-hand agony, he gave his student a grin. It was a pained, shaky, terrifying grin, but it was a grin nonetheless. See? He rasped, his voice strained. He coughed, a wet, ragged sound, and wiped the blood from his chin with the back of his hand. It works. He took another shaky breath. The pain, it's just as you described. It feels completely real. But I can bear it. My body is weak, my boy, but my will is still made of iron. He managed a weak chuckle. We can do this. We can bear this. Together. In that moment, standing on a beach of trash, surrounded by the wreckage of society's neglect, a new kind of hero was born, and his partner, the greatest hero the world had ever known, stood beside him, ready to shoulder a burden no one else could ever see. The weight was still impossibly heavy, but for the first time in his life, Izuku Midoriya was no longer carrying it alone. The 10 months of shared agony had forged a bond between Izuku and Tashinori that transcended mentorship. It was a strange, symbiotic relationship built on a foundation of mutual sacrifice. Every torn muscle, every strained ligament, every moment of sheer physical exhaustion Izuku experienced was a lesson for them both. For Izuku, it was practice in wielding the most terrifying weapon in his arsenal. For Tashinori, it was a slow, painful acclimatization to the agony he had willingly invited into his life. Each transfer was a horrifying ritual. Izuku would cry out in pain, clutch the afflicted body part, and look at his mentor with pleading, apologetic eyes. Toshinori would give a grim, determined nod. Then would come the transfer, the psychic jolt, the surge of pain into Izuku, the sickening click of the connection, and the agonizing release as he watched his hero flinch, groan, and fight to stay standing under the invisible assault. Toshinori never once asked him to stop. He endured it all with a terrifying stoicism, his gritted teeth smiles becoming a regular, if unsettling, feature of their training. He called it building calluses on the soul. But Izuku saw the toll it was taking. He saw the deepening lines of exhaustion around Toshinori's eyes, the way his hands would sometimes tremble uncontrollably long after a transfer was complete, the increasing frequency of his blood-tinged coughs. The pain wasn't just a fleeting sensation, it left echoes, ghosts of agony that settled into Toshinori's already broken body like silt in a riverbed. Izuku's guilt was a constant companion, a bitter taste in the back of his throat. But it was now mixed with a burgeoning, terrifying hope. His body, once frail and uncooperative, had become a honed instrument. The beach was clean, gleaming under the morning sun on the day of the UA entrance exam, a testament to his labor. He was stronger, faster, and more resilient than he had ever imagined possible. He had a tool, a terrible and powerful one, and a partner willing to bear its price. For the first time, the dream of becoming a hero felt real. It felt attainable. It felt deserved. On the morning of the exam, Toshinori met him at the gates of the beach. He looked more gaunt than usual, a deep weariness etched into his features. "You're ready, my boy," Toshinori said, placing a hand on Izuku's shoulder. His hand felt frail, like a bundle of twigs. "Your body is strong. Your heart has always been heroic. Today, you show them what you can do, what we can do," Izuku corrected, his voice quiet but firm. A pained smile touched Toshinori's lips. "Yes. What we can do." He looked out towards the distant UA campus. "I'll be in the observation room. Monitoring. Enduring. Just focus on what you need to do, don't hesitate." "Not today, I won't," Izuku promised, his voice tight with emotion. The weight of that promise felt immense. "Don't hesitate to hurt me." The UA auditorium was vast, intimidating. Izuku found a seat next to the explosive porcupine of anger that was Katsuki Bakugo, a coincidence that felt like a bad omen. He tried to keep to himself, shrinking into his seat as President Mike explained the rules of the practical exam. Villain bots. 1-pointers, 2-pointers, 3-pointers. A simple objective, rack up points by destroying as many as possible. It was a test of raw power, of offensive capability. And Izuku had none. His physical strength was for endurance, not for punching through steel. His quirk was for saving, not for destruction. As they stood before the massive gates of the mock cityscape, Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. The other applicants were stretching, their bodies crackling with latent power. A girl with purple hair was fiddling with jacks dangling from her earlobes. A boy with engines in his calves was revving them impatiently. Izuku felt like an imposter. "All right, start." President Mick's voice boomed. The gates opened. While everyone else sprinted forward, Izuku hesitated for a crucial second, a deer in the headlights. The others were a blur of motion, a wave of power crashing into the city. By the time he shook himself out of his stupor and ran in, the sounds of explosions and tearing metal were already echoing through the concrete canyons. The next few minutes were a frantic, humiliating exercise in futility. 1-pointers swarmed him, their red optic sensors locking onto him. He dodged and weaved, his new agility keeping him from being cornered, but he couldn't fight back. He threw a punch at a robot's metal chassis and only succeeded in rattling his own bones, a sharp, stinging pain shooting up his arm. He instinctively started to absorb it, felt the connection to Toshinori opening, and immediately shut it down. That wasn't what the power was for. Not for his own minor aches. He was useless. A fast-moving target with no offensive power. He saw other applicants decimating robots with ease. Bakugo was a whirlwind of explosions, screaming die. As he blasted bots to scrap, the nice girl with the brown, bobbed hair from the auditorium was tapping robots, causing them to float helplessly before she released them, sending them crashing to the ground. Everyone was scoring points. Everyone but him. 7 minutes left. He had 0 points. 0. He was going to fail. After all the training, all the pain he'd put All Might through, he was going to fail because he couldn't punch a robot. Despair began to creep in, cold and suffocating. Maybe All Might was wrong. Maybe he really couldn't be a hero. Meanwhile, in a darkened observation room high above the battleground, Toshinori Yagi sat amongst the other Yui staff, his frail form hidden in the shadows. He watched the monitors, his eyes tracking Izuku's frantic, pointless movements. "That's the boy who took on the sludge villain, isn't it?" said a tired voice beside him. Shota Aizawa, his face wrapped in his signature capture weapon, pointed a lazy finger at one of the screens. "He's quick on his feet, but he's got nothing else. Not a single point. He's a washout. Give him time, Aizawa," Toshinori rasped, trying to keep the anxiety out of his voice. He could feel Izuku's desperation, a faint thrum of psychic static through their bond. "Come on, my boy. Find your moment." The ground began to tremble. A deep, grinding roar echoed through the city, and a shadow fell over the entire battleground. The 0-pointer. It was colossal, a skyscraper of green metal and menace, its head scraping the tops of the buildings. It wasn't a test, it was an obstacle, a gimmick designed to send students running, and they did. The other applicants, their bravado gone, turned and fled. "It's the 0-pointer. Run for it!" Izuku, caught in the tide of panicking students, was being swept away with them. Failure was a certainty now. His exam was over. A bitter, acidic taste filled his mouth. He had let All Might down, then he heard a cry. "Ow!" He stopped, turning against the flow of the crowd. Lying on the ground, trapped under a pile of rubble shaken loose by the 0-pointer's emergence, was the kind girl with the brown hair. Achiko Uraraka. Her leg was pinned, and she was looking up at the approaching mechanical behemoth with wide, terrified eyes. The world went silent for Izuku. The fleeing students, the teachers' voices in the observation room, the grinding of the robot, it all faded away. There was only the girl, trapped and helpless, and the giant machine lumbering forward, its massive fists raising to smash the ground where she lay. This was it. Not a test of power. A test of spirit. His body moved before his brain could issue the command. He sprinted towards her, back into the path of the 0-pointer. He saw her terrified face, the tears welling in her eyes, the grimace of pain from her crushed leg. "Don't hesitate." All Might's voice echoed in his mind. He reached her side in a heartbeat. "Are you okay?" he yelled over the din. "My leg. I'm stuck," she cried, her voice trembling. He looked from her trapped leg to the falling debris still raining down around them. He looked up at the 0-pointer, its shadow now completely enveloping them. Its massive foot began its descent. There was no time to dig her out. No time to reason. There was only one option. He made the choice. He crouched over her, shielding her body with his own. He placed one hand on her shoulder, a point of contact. The other, he pressed firmly against the large slab of concrete pinning her leg. "It's going to be okay," he said, and his voice was imbued with a strange, profound calm. He looked into her wide, fearful eyes. "I'm going to take the pain away." And then he activated his quirk with the full force of his will. The jolt was monumental. It was a psychic explosion in his mind. The vacuum inside him didn't just open, it tore reality asunder. He pulled, and the pain came flooding in, not just one pain, but a symphony of agony. He felt the sharp, grinding torment of Uraraka's crushed leg bones. He felt the dull, concussive force of the rubble that was still falling, pelting his back. And most overwhelmingly, he felt the concept of the 0-pointer's imminent impact, a phantom, precognitive agony of being utterly, completely annihilated. It was the pain of 1,000 tons of steel crushing bone into powder, of organs rupturing, of a body being flattened into a red paste on the pavement. It was the single most excruciating sensation he had ever experienced, a tidal wave of pure, absolute suffering that threatened to obliterate his consciousness. In the observation room, Toshinori shot to his feet. He saw it on the monitor. Izuku, crouched over the girl, his body glowing with a faint, sickly green aura only visible to those who knew what to look for. He saw the grimace on his student's face. He knew what was coming. "My boy," he whispered, his own body tensing, bracing for the impact. Izuku held the torrent of agony within him for a microsecond that stretched into an eternity. His vision went white. A scream was clawing its way up his throat, but through the blinding pain, he held on to a single thought, a single command, a single destination: to All Might. All of it. Now, he felt the click. The psychic conduit, designed for torn muscles and exhaustion, was now a firehose open to a cataclysmic pressure. The pain surged out of him, a directed blast of pure torment fired across the city and into the observation room. The transfer was instantaneous. For Toshinori Yagi, the world ceased to exist. One moment, he was standing, watching a monitor. The next, his universe collapsed into a singularity of pain. It wasn't like the practice transfers. This was not a scraped knee or a pulled muscle. This was the end of the world level agony. His nervous system exploded. He felt his leg bones, both of them, snap and grind into splinters. He felt the sensation of every rib in his chest cracking simultaneously. A phantom pressure, immense and irresistible, flattened him, ruptured his internal organs, and squeezed the very air from his phantom lungs. It was the concentrated, distilled essence of a catastrophic, fatal injury, delivered directly to his consciousness without the mercy of physical shock or unconsciousness. He didn't scream. The pain was too immense for a sound that human. A choked, guttural roar tore from his throat as he collapsed, his frail body slamming against the console in front of him before crumpling to the floor. His vision went white, then black, then white again. Every nerve ending he possessed was on fire. His mind, the seat of his consciousness, was being torn apart. The other teachers yelled in alarm. "All Might! Toshinori! What's wrong? Medic! We need a medic in here!" Aizawa was the first to reach him, trying to turn him over. But Toshinori's body was rigid, his muscles locked in a full-body seizure, his teeth grinding so hard it was a miracle they didn't shatter. His sunken eyes were rolled back in his head, showing only the whites. He was no longer in the room. He was in a private hell, built for him by the boy he had chosen. Back in the arena, the pain vanished from Izuku's world as quickly as it had arrived. The psychic backlash, however, was immense. It felt like his brain had been scooped out and run through a blender. He was dizzy, nauseous, and his entire body felt like a tuning fork that had been struck against concrete. He looked down. Uraraka was staring up at him, her face a mask of profound confusion. "The pain," she whispered, her voice full of awe. It's gone. My leg doesn't hurt at all." Izuku gave her a weak, trembling smile. "Good," he managed to rasp. Then he looked up. The zero-pointer's massive foot was still descending, blotting out the sky. His quirk had saved her from the pain, but it hadn't saved them from the physical danger. He was drained, his mind reeling. He had nothing left, except for the body All Might had given him. With a primal scream that was part battle cry and part release of all his pent-up fear and frustration, Izuku bent his knees. He poured every ounce of his new strength, every calorie consumed from Inko's Katsudan, every drop of sweat shed on Dagoba Beach, into his legs. He jumped. He shot into the air like a cannonball, a green blur of motion, soaring upwards past the robot's knee, its torso, towards its massive, impassive face. He drew back his fist, the one he'd injured earlier. He didn't have a power like One for All to channel through it. He just had muscle, bone, and righteous, heroic fury. He punched the robot square in its faceplate. There was a deafening shriek of protesting metal. His fist broke through the outer casing, and the force of his jump, combined with the desperate strength of his punch, created a shockwave. It wasn't a smash, but it was enough. The zero-pointer's head buckled. It groaned, its optic sensor flickered and died, and its massive body froze, its descent halted. But for Izuku, the victory was costly. The recoil from punching solid steel with his bare, unquirked hand was catastrophic. He felt the bones in his arm shatter. The pain was immediate and blinding, a clean, sharp agony that was almost a relief compared to the transferred torment of moments before. His other limbs, overstrained by the impossible jump, broke as well. He was falling, a broken puppet with his strings cut, tumbling out of the sky towards the unforgiving pavement below. This is it, he thought, a strange sense of calm washing over him. I saved her. I did it. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry, All Might. He was about to hit the ground when he felt a light slap on his cheek. He looked over and saw Uraraka, now free from the rubble, reaching for him, her face determined. Release, she commanded, and his body was suddenly enveloped in a zero-gravity field. His deadly plummet slowed to a gentle, feather-like descent. He landed on the ground with a soft bump, and then, everything went black. He woke to the gentle, smooching sensation of Recovery Girl's Quirk. His bones were mended, his body whole. But the exhaustion, the deep, soul-level weariness, remained. He had passed, not with villain points, he still had 0 of those. But present Mick's voice echoed in his memory, explaining the hidden metric. And what kind of hero's school would we be if we didn't reward selfless, life-saving acts? That's right, listeners. Rescue points, and Izuku Midoriya, for saving another examinee at great personal risk, scored 60. A new record, he had done it. He was in, but as he lay in the nurse's office, a chilling thought crept into his mind. He hadn't just shattered his own bones, he had sent the phantom pain of being crushed to death into the body of an already critically injured man. He needed to see him. He was discharged, his body physically healed but his mind in turmoil. He rushed to the staff room, his heart pounding. He found Aizawa standing outside the door to a private infirmary room. The underground hero looked even more tired than usual, his expression grim. Midoriya, Aizawa said, his voice flat. You're awake. Is All Might, is he okay? Izuku asked, his voice trembling. Aizawa's eyes narrowed. He stared at Izuku for a long, unsettling moment, his gaze sharp and analytical. He collapsed during the exam. A severe episode. Related to his old injury, the doctors think. He's stable now, but he was unconscious for nearly an hour. The pain was extreme. Aizawa took a step closer, his voice dropping. It happened at the exact moment you pulled that stunt with the 0-pointer. Strange coincidence. Izuku felt a chill run down his spine. Aizawa was no fool. He was connecting the dots. Can I see him? Izuku pleaded. Aizawa considered him for another moment, then sighed and stepped aside. He's been asking for you. Izuku pushed the door open. The room was dim. Tashinori was lying in the bed, looking impossibly small and frail against the pristine white sheets. An IV drip was attached to his arm, and a heart monitor beeped a slow, steady rhythm beside him. His eyes were closed, his face pale and waxy. All Might? Izuku whispered, approaching the bed. Tashinori's eyes fluttered open. He turned his head on the pillow, and a weak, exhausted smile touched his lips. Young Midoriya, he rasped, his voice barely audible. You did it. I'm so sorry, Izuku said, tears welling up in his eyes as he took in the full extent of the damage he had caused. I didn't know it would be that bad. I hurt you. I hurt you so much. You did what you had to do, Tashinori whispered, his breath shallow. You saved that girl. You were a true hero. That's all that matters. But the cost was high, Tashinori admitted, his eyes clouding over with the memory of the pain. Higher than I anticipated. But I paid it. And I am still here. He coughed, a weak, rattling sound. And you, my boy, you are now a student of UA High. It was worth it. Izuku broke down, burying his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, guilt-ridden sobs. He had passed the test. He had achieved the first step of his dream. But the true cost was not his own broken bones, but the sight of his invincible hero, laid low and broken in a hospital bed, all because of him. He had become a hero. And his first official act had been to nearly kill the man who made it possible. The weight they shared had suddenly become terrifyingly, crushingly real. The first day at UA High should have been the greatest day of Izuku Midoriya's life. Walking through the colossal gates, wearing the crisp gray uniform, seeing the iconic glass building gleaming against the blue sky, it was the culmination of a dream he had nurtured in secret, a fantasy made tangible. For any other student, this would be a day of unadulterated excitement and pride. For Izuku, it was a minefield. Every smiling face was a potential liability. Every friendly gesture was a threat. The hallowed halls of his dream school had become a labyrinth of potential anchors. His senses were on high alert, a constant, thrumming anxiety coiled in his stomach. The psychic wiring of his Quirk, now fully awakened and tested, felt like an exposed nerve. He could almost feel the potential connections, the invisible threads of affection and camaraderie that might snap into place without his consent, turning a new friend into an unwitting victim. Love, the most celebrated of human emotions, had become his personal boogeyman. He saw the girl from the exam, Achiko Uraraka, her round face bright with infectious optimism. She bounded over to him, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "You got in! That's amazing! Your punch was incredible! Are you all settled in? Finding your classroom okay?" Why yes, thank you," Izuku stammered, taking an involuntary step back. Her kindness was a physical force, and he could feel the faint, terrifying glimmer of a potential bond forming. It felt like a warm, pleasant hum, but he knew it was the precursor to a scream. He had to sever it. He had to be cold. "I need to go," he said abruptly, his voice flatter than he intended. He turned and practically fled down the hallway, leaving a bewildered Uraraka in his wake. The hurt and confusion on her face was a small, sharp pain in his own chest, but it was infinitely better than the alternative. Then there was the tall, earnest boy with glasses, Tenya Ida, who had chastised him before the exam. He approached Izuku with a stiff, formal bow. "I must apologize for my behavior at the orientation. You grasped the true nature of the exam while I did not. You are clearly the superior student. I hope we can learn from one another." His respect was palpable, a different flavor of connection, but just as dangerous. Izuku mumbled a non-committal response and scurried away, his heart pounding. Each interaction was a roll of the dice. He couldn't risk it. He had his one anchor, his partner in this terrible pact. He couldn't bear the thought of accidentally shunting the pain of a rescue onto some innocent classmate during a training exercise. His isolation became his armor. He sat at the back of the classroom, his shoulders hunched, his gaze fixed on his notebook. He ate lunch alone on a secluded bench in the courtyard. When others tried to include him in conversations, he would offer clipped, one-word answers until they gave up and drifted away. His classmates, who had initially been curious about the boy who took down the zero-pointer, quickly labeled him as aloof, arrogant, or just plain weird. They didn't know his standoffishness was an act of profound, desperate protection. His real focus, his constant, obsessive worry, was All Might. Tashinori Yagi, in his role as a foundational heroics teacher, was a shadow of his usual bombastic self. He still entered the classroom with a booming "I am here," coming through the door like a normal person. But the energy was strained. The smile didn't quite reach his eyes. He favored his left side, the site of his old injury, and there were moments in class when he would pause mid-sentence, his face going pale, his hand subtly moving to grip the edge of a podium. Izuku saw every flicker of pain. He knew, with a sickening certainty, that these were not just echoes of the exam. They were new installments of a debt that was growing every day. The Quirk apprehension test on the first day was a nightmare. Aizawa, their homeroom teacher, was a harsh, logical taskmaster who pushed them to their limits. Izuku managed to get through most of the tests using his wits and his honed physique, but the ball throw was a direct challenge. Aizawa had erased his Quirk once, assuming it was a simple power-up. "You're not a one-trick pony, are you, Midoriya?" Aizawa had drawled. "Show me what else you've got." Izuku knew he couldn't use his Quirk offensively. But he had to do something. Remembering his training, he focused all his strength into the tip of one finger, just as he threw. The resulting snap of his finger bone was a clean, sharp agony. The ball flew, propelled by the last-second burst of force, and his score was acceptable. The pain, however, was excruciating. His first instinct, now honed by months of practice, was to absorb it. He felt the psychic vacuum open, felt the sharp, shattering pain pull from his finger into his core. He felt the cord snap taut, reaching for Tashinori. He was about to complete the transfer when he saw him. All Might was standing with the other students, observing. He saw the almost imperceptible tensing of his mentor's body, the way his eyes widened slightly in anticipation. He was ready, but Aizawa was watching them both. His tired, perceptive eyes flickered from Izuku's pained expression to All Might's rigid posture. A flash of suspicion, of deep analytical curiosity, crossed Aizawa's face. He was seeing a pattern, a correlation that made no logical sense. Izuku aborted the transfer. He let the pain slam back into his finger. It was agony, but it was a calculated choice. He couldn't let Aizawa see. He couldn't let anyone get close to their secret. He cradled his broken finger, his face pale with the effort of containing the scream that wanted to tear out of him. He would let Recovery Girl heal it later. The cost of maintaining their secret was his own suffering. It was a price he was willing to pay. His life became a constant, nerve-wracking tightrope walk. His phone was his lifeline and his torment. He had to check in with Tashinori constantly, but every text message was fraught with anxiety. Izuku, 10:15 a.m. All Might, are you okay? You seem to be in pain during third period. All Might, 10:18 a.m. Perfectly fine, my boy. Just a twinge. Keep your focus on your studies. Ha ha ha! The forced cheerfulness was more worrying than an admission of pain would have been. Izuku knew he was lying. Tashinori was trying to protect him from guilt, but the lies only amplified it. Izuku started keeping a secret log in the back of one of his notebooks, a painful tally. 8:30 a.m. Quirk apprehension test. Broke finger. Did not transfer. 2:05 p.m. foundational heroics. Minor scrape during combat drill with Bakugo. Transferred. All Might flinched, coughed for 2 minutes straight afterward. 9:40 p.m. stub toe walking to dorms. Absorbed pain instinctively. Felt the link open. Aborted before transfer. Must be more careful. He was becoming a connoisseur of agony. He learned the different textures of pain. A burn was a high-frequency, searing static. A broken bone was a deep, discordant bass note. A cut was a sharp, clean slash. And the emotional pain of others, that was the most dangerous of all. He could feel it radiating from his classmates, Bakugo's explosive rage hiding a deep-seated insecurity, Todoroki's icy calm masking a furnace of resentment, Uraraka's bright cheerfulness papering over her anxieties about her family's poverty. He avoided them all, terrified of what absorbing their anguish might do to All Might, or to himself. The battle trial was the first major test of their system in a real combat scenario. Izuku was paired with Uraraka, facing off against Bakugo and Ida. The heroes versus the villains. Before the match, Izuku cornered All Might in the observation room. Promise me, Izuku whispered, his voice intense. If I have to do it, promise me you'll hide it. Aizawa is watching. They're all watching. Tashinori, already looking worn out, placed a hand on his shoulder. I promise, young Midoriya. Do what you must. I will play my part. The battle was a chaotic, brutal affair. Bakugo was a force of nature, his rage entirely focused on Izuku. He was hunting him, his explosions tearing apart the building. DKU, you've been hiding something from me. What is that, Quirk? Did you lie to me all these years? Izuku, using his wits and the new full cowling technique he'd been developing, channeling a tiny, non-painful amount of his Quirk's energy through his body for enhanced speed and agility, managed to evade him, but he knew it wouldn't last. He finally confronted Bakugo on the 4th floor. The ensuing fight was short and brutal. Bakugo, in a fit of pique, unleashed a massive explosion, a point-blank blast from his gauntlet that Izuku barely managed to dodge. The shockwave, however, still sent him flying, slamming him hard against the concrete pillar. He felt a rib crack. The pain was sharp, electric, stealing his breath. It lanced through his side, a white-hot poker. He crumpled to the floor, gasping. Bakugo stood over him, panting, his eyes wild. See? You're still just a useless Deku. But Izuku wasn't listening. The pain was all-consuming. He knew Uraraka was close to the objective. He knew this was his only chance. He had to get up. He had to be the distraction. He closed his eyes. I'm sorry, All Might. He pulled the pain from his side. The clean, sharp agony of the broken rib flooded his senses. He felt the familiar, sickening click, and he sent it. In the observation room, Toshinori was giving commentary, his voice amplified throughout the building. Young Bakugo is showing impressive combat sense, but his personal grudge is clouding his. He stopped mid-sentence. It felt like a mule had kicked him in the ribs. A phantom bone in his side snapped with an audible mental crack. The pain was so sudden, so precise, it stole his breath. His vision swam. He gripped the edge of the console, his knuckles turning white. The other students didn't notice, their attention glued to the screens. But Shota Aizawa noticed. He saw All Might falter. He saw the gasp of air, the beads of sweat that instantly popped out on his brow, the way his hand instinctively went to his side, the exact same side Izuku was clutching on the monitor. He saw the symbol of peace grit his teeth, his face a mask of barely concealed agony, while his voice over the intercom remained impossibly, unnaturally calm. His personal grudge is clouding his judgment. All Might finished, his voice strained, but level. A hero must always remain objective. Aizawa's eyes narrowed into slits. Once is a coincidence. Twice is a pattern. He looked from the struggling hero in the control room to the struggling student on the screen. The synchronicity was perfect. Too perfect. There was a connection there, an invisible transaction of cause and effect that defied all known Quirk science. And Aizawa, a man whose entire life revolved around logic and the deconstruction of powers, was not going to let it go. He had a new puzzle to solve, and its name was Izuku Midoriya. Down in the training ground, his side now blissfully numb, Izuku staggered to his feet. He looked Bakugo in the eye. "I'm not going to fight you, Kaken." He then yelled into his comms, "Uraraka, now!" His final move, the building-destroying punch that secured their victory, was an act of pure, calculated desperation. The recoil shattered his arm again, but the pain was a distant, secondary concern. They had won. Later, as Recovery Girl was healing his arm, Toshinori visited him, looking pale and walking stiffly. "You were magnificent, my boy," he whispered, so no one else could hear. How bad was it?" Izuku asked, his voice trembling. "Just a broken rib," Toshinori said with a weak smile. "I've had worse. I kept my promise." No one noticed, but Izuku knew he was lying. He had seen Aizawa's face on the monitor just before the end. He noticed. And that was a problem. A big one. The anxiety became a constant, living thing inside him, a parasite feeding on his guilt. He started having nightmares. Not of villains or monsters, but of his mother's face, contorted in a silent scream. He would wake up in a cold sweat, his heart pounding, and immediately check his phone for a text from her, just to make sure she was okay. He was so terrified of forming a new bond that he almost forgot about the primary one, the one he'd sworn to protect. The fear of his quirk targeting Uraraka or Ida was so immediate that the danger to his mother felt distant, a problem he had solved. But he knew deep down that the link was still there, dormant and waiting, a loaded gun in the back of his mind. The final proof of Aizawa's suspicion came during a rescue training exercise at the Unforeseen Simulation Joint, the USJ. When the villains warped in, the idyllic training exercise turned into a genuine life-or-death struggle. Izuku, along with Uraraka and Ida, was separated from the main group. He fought as best he could, using his wits and his limited full cowling. But his main concern, his sickening dread, was for his teachers. He watched from a distance as Aizawa, the formidable Eraserhead, leaped into the fray, his quirk erasing the powers of dozens of villains at once. He was incredible. A whirlwind of capture scarf and precise, brutal takedowns. And then the Nomu appeared. The creature was a monster of raw, unnatural power. A bioengineered nightmare designed for one purpose, to kill All Might. It was fast, strong, and its primary quirk was shock absorption. Aizawa's erasure was useless against its physical might. The fight was a slaughter. Izuku could only watch in horror as the Nomu caught Aizawa. It smashed his head against the concrete, the sickening crunch echoing across the plaza. It twisted his arms, snapping the bones like twigs. It broke him, methodically, brutally, piece by piece. Aizawa's screams were horrifying. Toshinori, back at the main campus, was blissfully unaware. He had used up his time for the day and was in his office, working. He was safe. He was the designated anchor. But he wasn't available. Izuku stood frozen, his mind racing. Aizawa was dying. The students were next. Shigaraki, the villain with the decay quirk, was walking towards them, his smile a terrifying rictus. Someone had to do something. Izuku looked at Aizawa's broken, bleeding form, at the unholy pain twisting his teacher's body. He could take it. He could absorb that agony, give Aizawa a moment of clarity, a chance to survive. But where would it go? Tashinori was out of reach. There was no time to establish a new, emergency bond. His mind frantically searched for another anchor. Ida? Uraraka? The thought was so horrific it made him want to vomit, to take Aizawa's catastrophic, life-threatening injuries and force them onto his new, unsuspecting friends. Unthinkable, but his quirk was a tool of love. It latched onto the strongest, most foundational bonds, and as he stared at his dying teacher, his mind screaming for a solution, a different connection flared to life in his mind. Not a new one, but the oldest one. The original one. The one he had sworn on his life he would never use again. The psychic cord that connected him to Inko Midoriya. The choice was laid bare before him, stark and monstrous in its simplicity. 1. Do nothing. Let Aizawa die. Let the Nomu and Shigaraki slaughter his classmates. 2. Transfer Aizawa's agony to Uraraka or Ida, potentially crippling them with psychic trauma or killing them from the shock, and betraying their fledgling trust. 3. Use the one link he swore he would never touch again. Save everyone here, at the cost of torturing his mother. The hero inside him, the one who had jumped to save Bakugo, the one who had broken his bones for Uraraka, screamed at him. A hero saves everyone they can, and in that moment, Izuku Midoriya made a cold, hard, terrible calculation. A hero's calculus. The needs of the many outweighed the suffering of the one. Even if that one was his own mother. Tears streamed down his face, invisible in the aquatic gloom of the shipwreck zone. With a silent, soul-shattering apology that he knew would never be heard, he made his choice. He moved, a blur of green lightning. He reached the central plaza just as the Nomu was about to deliver the final, crushing blow. He slid across the ground, his hand outstretched, and slapped it firmly on Aizawa's blood-soaked back. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words for his teacher, for his mother, for himself. "I'm so sorry." He pulled. The world ended. If the pain from the zero-pointer was a tidal wave, this was a supernova. The shattering of an elbow. The splintering of a femur. The crushing pressure on an eye socket. The raw, grinding agony of a skull being repeatedly slammed into concrete. It was a symphony of torture, a masterpiece of suffering. It ripped through him, shredding his consciousness, but he held on, his will a diamond-hard point of focus in the hurricane of pain. The connection to his mother, dormant for a decade, flared to life with the intensity of a forest fire. It was a feeling of warmth, safety, and unconditional love, now perverted into a conduit for unimaginable torment. He pushed the pain down that sacred cord. Miles away, in a quiet, peaceful apartment, Inko Midoriya was watering her plants, humming a gentle tune. She was thinking about what to make for dinner, wondering if Izuku was having a good day at his dream school. The pain hit her like a lightning strike from a clear blue sky. Her world dissolved into white-hot agony. Her legs gave out, and she crashed to the floor, a scream tearing from her throat, raw and animalistic. Her arm felt like it was being twisted from its socket. Her head exploded with a pain so intense she thought she was dying, the sensation of concrete grinding against her skull terrifyingly real. Her body convulsed on the floor, her mind unable to process the phantom assault that had come from nowhere. She didn't know why, she didn't know how, but she was in hell. Back at the USJ, the pain vanished from Izuku's senses. He was left shaking, numb, and hollowed out, the psychic equivalent of a ghost. Aizawa, his body still broken but his mind suddenly clear of the blinding agony, managed to use the last of his strength to erase Shigaraki's quirk for a split second as the villain reached for Tsuyu. It was just enough time for the real All Might to smash through the doors, his face a mask of thunderous fury. "Have no fear," he roared, his eyes landing on the broken form of Aizawa and the trembling, ghost-pale student beside him. "For I am here." The battle was won. The villains were driven back. The students were saved. But as Izuku watched his hero fight the Nomu, he felt no triumph. He felt no relief. He felt nothing but the vast, cold, empty abyss of his own soul. He had become the hero he always wanted to be. And in doing so, he had become the monster he had always feared.